People typically don't know about probate until someone passes away. And that's not the right time to know about probate, correct?
Oh, it's always better to know. It's better to be prepared. I'll just say that. And unfortunately, I've actually had a very recent situation where you also want to make sure your attorney knows what they're doing too, because sometimes people think that they are prepared, and it turns out what their attorney had them do was nothing. helped in no way, shape, or form to making sure that their loved one's assets were protected after death. So
Yeah.
you also got to research your attorneys if you are trying to prepare ahead of time.
And and that goes and of course, if I don't put a bad light on any profession, but you want to make sure when you're selecting professionals, that's their area of expertise. You don't want to, deal with an attorney who's pretty much their area of expertise is criminal law, or their focus, and then they tiptoe in other things so that they can at least make add some income into their coffer. So you always want to, as you said, that was an excellent point, Lisa. You really want to make sure that you're whoever you choose to do business with, that's what their focus of law is. So that's a good point. Now, the second thought is it says nearly half of America, and even less than half, have some sort of estate plan. So is that true?
Less than half? Oh yeah. And it's interesting because I feel like the people who need it the most are the ones that don't have anything set up. It's usually those who don't have a lot going on. They'll do like a quick will or a quick POA, but it's those that actually have things worth protecting that don't have anything in order. And like you were saying before, it's just so many people don't understand. They don't understand that each state has their own laws. So, there's some people who think if they just write something out and sign it, that's all that's needed. That's not how it works in Illinois. Judges are very particular of what needs to be in a will or or a power of attorney. And Yeah, it's just people just aren't. A lot of people go to the LegalZoom a little too much, and LegalZoom isn't state specific. So
Yeah. Well, just like everything else, you Google it and you can get your answer. So
right.
that's not always the case. And I'm glad you did speak a little bit on the different instruments that people think is protecting them, because I just in my experience, people think if they have a power of attorney, that's all they need if a person passes away. And your response to that is?
A power of attorney is when someone is living. So a power of attorney expires upon the death of that person. You can't. A power of attorney does not extend beyond the death of that person. The situation I was saying before, where attorney kind of led a client astray, was that type of situation. They put on the power of attorney that it's forever and always. No, that doesn't work in Illinois. Power of attorneys are statutory. There's certain language. You can't go beyond the person's death. The judge is not going to accept that or acknowledge it or anything.
Yeah, and that even goes for another instrument that people use is, okay, I did a quit claim. So if something were to happen to a loved one, then it was quit claim to me, and so I have all the power to do what I need to do with that property. Is that true?
I mean, so it depends is the answer.
Okay.
Again, this goes back to making sure you have the right attorney, because some people do quit claims when they don't have the right status to do so. So for instance, someone can do a quit claim on a property that's currently there's a mortgage attached to that property. Right. So a person could try to quit claim it to their family, to maybe their son or their daughter. The mortgage company is going to reverse that, because you can't quit claim a piece of property that is still inhabited by a mortgage. You can do it if, let's say, you are married and you want to make sure that both you and your spouse are on title. You can do it that way, but that's again goes back to making sure you have the right attorney, because there are some instances where if a quit claim is properly executed and properly recorded, then that property then belongs to whoever you quit claimed it to. There also are situations you have to make sure that the tenancy is correct. So in Illinois, you have joint tenancy, you have tenants in common. If you don't specify that it's a joint tenancy, Illinois is going to automatically assume that it's tenants in common, which means that once that one person passes, it doesn't automatically transfer to the next person. It transfers to that person who deceased, their heirs. So then that makes it difficult. So again, you got to make sure you're talking with people who know what they're talking about,
right?
To make sure you're doing the right thing. Because again, in some cases, a quit claim deed will work perfectly fine, but in a lot of cases, it just makes things worse. So
yeah. I met Richard when I had one of my clients had a contract, right? And the buyer attempted to get it through their first lender. And for some reason, whatever that is, she couldn't get it. And so how I got introduced to Richard was the attorney's office that was handling my client's file said, hey, I know this guy. If it can be done, he knows that it can. If he says it can be done, it can get done. And so I'm like, okay, well, you know what? You guys are efficient in this office. So I would imagine efficiency knows efficiency, right? And so anyway, we ended up, the buyer ended up going to you, and you figured out a way to get her approved. But of course, she decided that she didn't want to go forward with it. But the keynote, the key plug out of that is you really did follow up. I think you contacted us right away. Even though it was late, you reached out, and and it was like, I just felt like, okay, this is the real deal. And so a lot of companies will say we care, but it shows in their action. So I just really, really had to plug that about you, because that's how I got introduced to you. And a lot of times it is by referral. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you on that one, but I had to get that out.
No, I appreciate that. Our branch or our office mission statement is really that we make the lives of our customers, our business partners, and our employees better by what we do every day. Mm-hmm. And so in that speaking, we've got to take care of people. One of the things that we're known for on my team is rescue loans. Now, rescue loans is kind of what you just described.
Right.
For some reason, the deal went south somewhere else. You send it to us. 30 years of experience here. We sell directly to Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie. And we don't have, in my industry, there's a term called overlays. It's a really dirty word, but It's overlays. And what it is FHA will come and say, okay, here's our guidelines. This is how we'll lend. FHA, most people don't know this. FHA will lend down to a credit score of 500. It's crazy. Most people don't know that, because most banks or credit unions or whoever, they have an overlay. If I can sneak that in the camera.
Overlay.
They have an overlay where they say, hey, we're not going to make any FHA loans under a credit score of 640. Well, that's not what FHA says. FHA says, hey, look, we'll go down to 580, and then if you go below 580, we just want more equity. Mm-hmm. We want you, the buyer, to have more skin in the game. So we're able to pick up some things and save some things, because we're really able to lend the way the guidelines were meant to be.
Right.
And so that's a really important part of it on the rescue part of it.
Or the case may be, that home improvement exemption is a temporary exemption that essentially lets you be assessed as what you were prior for a couple years. It's about 4 years, I believe, and I think it may fade off and then slowly get you to where you're going to be going forward. But it does allow for a temporary reduction for home improvements, for major home improvements. This isn't for stuff like, things I've been able to help people with through the past year. A lot of people are looking at their taxes, starting to understand things, and they're asking me a lot of questions. With exemptions in Cook County, the nice thing is you can actually correct them. If you were entitled to a homestead exemption, which is if you own the property where you live, your house, then you're entitled to a homestead exemption. What that is in Cook County is it's a calculation that typically ranges anywhere from $500 to $3,000, frankly, depending on where your property is. And that's based on your local tax rate. Again, if your tax rate is 10%, then you're entitled to a homestead exemption of about $1,000. But those vary wildly throughout Cook County. But the nice part is, if you bought a property and you've lived there for 5 or 6 years, and you look at your bill one day and you realize you're not getting a homestead exemption, you can actually apply for what's called a certificate of error, and you can get that exemption retroactively, where the county will literally just cut you a check, and they'll say, sorry, they didn't know about it, and they'll just issue you a check if you provide them with the appropriate affidavits, copies of your driver's license, etc., that they'll ask you to do. They've even put a really good website out online at the Cook County Assessor. They have an online application where you can DocuSign everything. You can upload a picture of your driver's license, and you can fill out and sign an affidavit and get the certificate of error applied for and refunds issued pretty quickly. It's one of the things the new assessor has done, and it's a great thing.
Is there, a question that I have, because, seniors, of course, are always concerned about the senior and the senior freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a specific cap on your income in order to receive the senior citizen and the senior freeze exemption?
So that's a great question. And so the way it works, the first thing is all exemptions are based on essentially there being a homestead exemption. Now, this is the most important thing to note, is if you buy a property, the exemptions are based on who lived there on January 1st of the tax year. And again, we pay in arrears. So in 2021, the bill you get in July is calculated based on who lived there on January 1st, 2020. This frustrates a lot of new homeowners because if they bought a vacant property that didn't have an exemption, they don't get it for quite some time because, again, it's January 1st. And if you buy in February of 2021 and the tax bill comes out this year, you're not going to get an exemption, or you're not entitled to it. Your seller may have been entitled to it, but if there was a vacant property that didn't have one, you might not get it. And then next year, when you apply, you're still technically not eligible because January 1st of 2021, it was the vacant seller. And then it's the following year, in 2023, when you're actually going to see it, because that's 2022 is when you're eligible, and that shows up in 2023. It is a bit wild. Now, that's the homeowners. Once you have that homestead exemption, if you're above the age of 65, that's the only requirement for the senior exemption. Then you can get an additional exemption over the age of 65. And the 65 is actually just if you turn 65 that year. It's not if you're 65 as of January 1st. It's just that calendar year you turn 65, you're entitled to the exemption the next year, assuming you have an existing homestead exemption. The final one is the senior freeze, which does have that income cap. And that is based on you having a homestead, having the property as your homestead, being above the age of 65, and then the senior freeze has a household income limit of $65,000. So what that means is if your income from any and every source, Social Security, pensions, retirements, your job, is above $65,000 a year, you're not eligible for the freeze. The other thing is it's household income. So if you have an adult child living with you and working, their income is part of that. And so you have to combine it all to figure out. So you have to be below that $65,000 a year cap. And on top of that, the freeze itself doesn't actually offer a significant reduction. So it offers a small little reduction, but then what it does is it locks the assessed value in. So that assessed value then gets frozen, and your tax rate can still change, and it will still change, but your tax rate is never going to change by 70% in 1 year. I say never, but don't hold me to that. But realistically, your tax rate's never going to change by a significant amount. It might go up or down a little. Every year it's going to happen. But your assessment, which again is the basis of your tax bill, and it's the largest part of your tax bill, is the number that gets frozen. And that is frozen for as long as you own the house and as long as you file every year and confirm that your income has remained below $65,000. And so that's the biggest thing. It is the senior freeze requires an annual application because there is an income limit. And so you have to confirm every year that you're still not making above the $65,000.
Ryan, I had a couple of questions about some other exemptions, if you don't mind me
Absolutely.
asking.
We're on exemptions right now.
Yes. What about, I came across some long time homeowners exemption?
Yeah, the long-time homestead exemption was an older exemption. They've actually kind of sunset that, so it's not really applicable anymore. That was an exemption they offered in Cook County, but I believe they sunset that as of 2015. if I'm correct.
What about home improvement exemption? Is that another
The
one?
home improvement exemption is a spectacular exemption to be aware of. It's also one of the weirdest exemptions because it happens when you typically pull a permit. You pull a permit, I'm going to put a second story on this house. You pull a permit, I'm going to add a basement or whatever, put a sunroom on, or add 1,000 square feet to the house. And what the home improvement exemption does is once that permit is finalized, instead of immediately adding a new valuation to your property and say, okay, your square foot just changed from 2,000 to 2,500 square feet on your house, or whatever the case may be, that home improvement exemption is a temporary exemption that essentially lets you be assessed as what you were prior for a couple years. It's about 4 years, I believe, and I think it may fade off and then slowly get you to where you're going to be going forward. But it does allow for a temporary reduction for home improvements, for major home improvements. This isn't for stuff like, upkeep, which is considered, remodeling, or, putting windows, roofs, floors, siding, that sort of stuff. This is for when you really change the characteristics of a house. The other one, go ahead.
No. So I can see, because, of course, I won't say what sellers are doing this, but a lot of times sellers won't get a permit to have work done to their home because they're trying to avoid their home being assessed at a higher value. So is this kind of an incentive to say, look, tell us what you're doing. We'll give you an exemption so you don't, so you're not, just going nuts when you get your, when you get your tax bill.
Yeah. So that is, it really is. It's kind of an incentive to counter that. But the biggest thing, and I always tell people this, is especially in Cook County, the assessor is typically never going to care you pulled a permit for anything. Like, unless you add square footage and, again, change the facts of your house, I can't imagine a single permit the assessor can possibly care about. Like, you pull a permit for windows, siding, roof, all of them at the same time, it still is not going to impact your assessment. The assessor, again, is using mass data, and they assume people are going to replace their roof every 10, 20, 40 years based on the lifespan of a roof. And they have calculations and stuff for that. So the assessor, at least in Cook County, never really cares about the permits you pull. And that exemption is exactly that. It's an incentive to encourage people to pull permits for things that would impact the factual characteristics of their property, or just in pulling permits in general, because you are 100% correct in that a lot of people do not pull permits for all sorts of things. The other exemption that I like to talk about is the veterans exemption. The veterans exemption there's a small exemption for returning veterans. So recently, any veteran who's recently served can get a small exemption. But the bigger one is if there's a veteran with a service-related disability, and in Cook County, or actually most of Illinois now, that can be up to a total property tax exemption for properties valued under, I think it's like $750,000, give or take. That number kind of fluctuates. There is a ceiling on it, but you can have a decent house if you have a service-related disability with no property taxes in Illinois. And that was something. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I should say that was one of those things that got pushed through by like the old assessor and stuff like that. It took a long time to get through, and recently got enacted. And there's just a lot of people who they're not even aware of it. Yeah.
And I'm going to let your screen come back, but I've got, because I've got a lot of questions, and I'm sorry if I, ask a lot of questions, but if you have a veteran that lives, the veteran isn't on title, but they live in your home, and is there a way that you can get the exemption, if it can be applied to your property?
So that is Very good question. And the easiest way to do it is to just add them as an owner on title. It's the most clear-cut way, because the rule is if they own the property, they use it as their primary residence, or not necessarily own, but if they use the property as their primary residence and they are responsible for the tax bill, and then they're entitled to the exemption. And so those are the requirements, and the easiest way to meet that second one is put them on the deed, because if they're on title to the house, they are responsible for the property taxes. And if it's their primary residence, it's a great thing to do, because like I said, there can be a $0 tax bill for that.
I am hoping that you can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Peace, everybody.